Hello, I'm Michael Burnam-Fink. I'm a lifelong student, a future educator, and a professional academic. And as such, I'm fascinated by education in all its forms, its purpose, its process and outcomes, how knowledge is increased in the world, and how minds develop. Now, I'm a science and technology studies scholar, disciplinarily, and as such, I work on the interactions around technological change and human beings. MOOCs are a recent and controversial development in higher education, and there's a lot of hype and exaggeration on both the pro and con sides. In this presentation, I plan to provide an overview of MOOCs as they exist today, explore their pedagogic theory, examine 2 example MOOC classes in detail, link it into the purpose and business of higher education, and finally, examine what MOOCs might do to higher education in the context of some recent other digital disruptions to reconstruct a realistic assessment of the challenges and opportunities for MOOCs. Some definitions. A MOOC is a massive open online course. Massive means that there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students participating in a single course. Open means it's outside the university. You don't need to be enrolled as a student. You don't need to pay significant amounts of tuition, although there may be some nominal fees. And in some extreme cases, it means that the educational experience itself is created by the students working together and not in an authoritative top-down manner from the teacher. Online refers to the fact that this scales using information technology, that everything takes place in a variety of virtual environments, brief video presentations, web forums, email discussion lists, and the like. And of course, simply this is about knowledge and learning and the educational experience. Some hard numbers. Why do MOOCs matter? First off, there's the decline in the number of tenured and tenure-track faculty teaching in universities from 1975 to 2009. This trend shows no sign of reversing. So essentially there are fewer professionals and more part-timers and graduate students. Second, students are not spending a lot of time studying, only about 25 hours a week in a full-time education, and they are also not noticeably improving their academic performance, at least according to the Collegiate Learning Assessment and a book, Academically Adrift, which made some waves when it came out last year. And finally, despite this, the cost of college has gone up at an alarming rate, yet the earnings of graduates with bachelor degrees have not increased at all. And at best, you can say that people with a bachelor's degree are less likely to be out of work in the modern economy than people with just a high school education or less. So, the hype around MOOCs, given that there is a real demand for change and for something new. Sebastian Thrun, who taught one of the first MOOCs to garner a lot of attention, a Stanford course on AI with over 100,000 students, described it as a red pill and a blue pill. I've taken the red pill and I've seen Wonderland. Andrew Ng, co-founder of Coursera and another Stanford professor, says that his company is growing faster than Facebook. A writer for the Chronicle of Higher Education described a future that is so clearly one of universal access to free, high-quality, impeccably branded online courses that their presence can simply be assumed. And finally, the New York Times deemed 2012 the year of the MOOC, and their columnist Thomas Friedman wrote that nothing has more potential to unlock 1 billion more brains to solve the world's biggest problems than MOOCs. So there is hype. Now MOOCs are mostly done by 3 major companies. The first is Udacity. This is Sebastian Thrun's company, developed out of his Stanford AI course, which is mostly does computer science, math, business, physics, and the like. It's an independent company developing its own content, has technology centered around automated grading and some proctored exams, and it connects the resumes of its best performing students to tech companies. And it's raised $15 million in venture capital and has had 700,000 students as of August 2012. And it is partnered with San Jose State University to provide some content for their courses. Coursera is another model, and this is Daphne Koller and Andrew Ng's course, And this is about allowing professors to easily create their own MOOCs with short video lectures, quizzes, and peer-graded performances. And as such, they have a lot more courses, 221, and a lot more disciplines. Their integrity is about honor code, peer assessment, and some experimental face recognition software to make sure that you're actually using the computer that you're logged into. And they've raised $22 million in venture capital, and they've had the most students with 2.6 million. edX is a collaboration between MIT, Harvard, UC Berkeley, and some other universities to put their own current highly rigorous courses online and to extend their brand into a global market. And they are offering 13 courses this semester: science, engineering, math, and some classics and social sciences. And their integrity is based around hard courses, randomly generated numbers in the math problems so you can't just share answers online, and some proctored exams. And they are backed by quite a lot of money from their member institutions, 60 million, and they've had large enrollments for their early courses, particularly MIT's 602X, which we will be examining. Now, there are lots of other players in this space, and this is just a small sample. You have Khan Academy, which is short video tutorials on a variety of subjects, although mostly at the elementary and high school levels. Peer-to-peer university and open study are about students teaching each other. Blackboard and eCollege are moves by course management software into this space. Traditional companies expanding into something new, and Under Academy is a deliberately absurdist, postmodernist, totally unaccredited nonsense joke university, which is quite funny to look at. Now, the pedagogic theory around MOOCs is based on something called connectivism, which was developed by George Siemens in 2005. And what he realized was that this is the 21st century, this is the digital era, and knowledge has changed. It's no longer about what you know and how quickly you can regurgitate what you know or make sense of what you know, but it's about making connections in this limitless network of digital information, and about learners and teachers collaborating to generate this new forms of knowledge very quickly. And this is opposed to behaviorism and cognitism, which is this sort of Skinner box, tests and drills method, and constructivism, which is about minds meeting together to create personal meaning and sort of these serious intellectual conversations. Now, Siemens got his chance to put his theories into practice in this connectivism course, which was taught through the University of Manitoba in 2008, which had about 20 students attending in person and 2,300 following online. And some reviews of this course discovered that the curated email lists, which Siemens and his co-teacher Stephen Downes produced, were considered the most useful tools. Students also found the social networking systems fairly useful. However, they often felt overwhelmed by information, and it was unclear how important user-created content was to the course as a whole. So in terms of applying this pedagogic theory, well, behavior cognitism is great if you want to compare changes in learning across groups. So doing studies on standardized tests or class attainment for different schools and at different times. Constructivism matches the introspective experience of scholars, that aha moment when you finally understand something new. But connectivism is much fuzzier. If you try and get past the digital utopian rhetoric, it's unclear what's underneath it, and whether or not it's actually being applied to these courses. So really, MOOCs could be best described as an industrial revolution in education, an attempt to turn a craft skill, teaching people one at a time or in small groups, into this giant assembly line where machines automate a lot of the labor, duplicate the best practices, and improve quality overall. And as with all revolutions, this has inspired a backlash. A group of 6 San Diego community college leaders said that it was simply impossible for technology to replace human interactions and the vital social experience of face-to-face classrooms. Ian Bogos, a professor of philosophy at Georgia Tech, argues that MOOCs are not actually about openness and information as power, but rather about closing off higher education in a very small group of companies which are funded by venture capital and have suspicious motives. And Aaron Brady, who is an English scholar, argues that what's going on here is not creative destruction, but just destruction, and that if MOOCs replace education, they will not replace it with anything worthwhile. So there's a lot of hype, and unfortunately, because MOOCs as a mass phenomenon are about a year old, all these big companies were founded in the first part of 2012, there's not a lot of solid data about how good MOOCs are. We can examine two courses. MIT 6002X was their online version of their circuits course. It was a very hard, very real course, just as hard as anything that you would get at MIT. Students who completed it had a great experience, said that they learned a lot, that they worked really hard. But yet, if you look at the enrollment, there was this massive dropout rate. 95.5% of people who enrolled did not finish the course. Now, of course, this might not be fully fair. I mean, a lot of people might say, I'm going to learn MIT circuits this year, and then realize that that's hard and not do it. Much like on January 1st, people say they're going to cut out cake and go to the gym every day, and usually don't. The 69% dropout rate from people who got at least 1 point on the first assignment is probably more accurate. But as you can see, these very high persistent dropout rates are a feature of rigorous MOOCs. Stanford's AI course had a 7% pass rate, for example, from people who enrolled in the start. And it is unclear if something which has dropout rates of over 90% can really be considered to be an innovation in education. This problem has to be solved. Second, this Coursera course, Fundamentals of Online Education, Planning and Applications, was a 40,000 course which just crashed in a spectacular public fashion on February 1st. Students were supposed to assign themselves into groups using a Google spreadsheet, and it turns out that if you try and get more than 50 people to edit a Google spreadsheet at once, you will crash one of Google's servers. People were unable to understand why they were supposed to be in groups. They didn't know what they were supposed to be learning. The video links were all broken, and the professor was unable to fix them rapidly. And what we learned from this is that clarity of course objectives is very important, because you need to get people to teach themselves in a lot of respects. That when this stuff goes wrong, it goes wrong really quickly, and you need to have good technical skills to fix it, which is not always the case for many professors, and disasters are very public and can be very dramatic. Given these two courses, I'd like to talk about the purpose of the university and how MOOCs might change that. Now, the Institute for Higher Education Policy released this survey on the purpose of the university, dividing the public and private benefits of education. And on the private side, basically, education allows you to move up the social hierarchy, it gets you a better job, and it can be personally fulfilling. On the public side, educated people are better citizens, they're a more productive workforce, and then you can use science and technology to advance national ends like security, health, new technologies, and the like. Of course, this describes what universities are supposed to achieve, not how they do it. I would like to argue that in many ways what universities actually do on a day-to-day basis is they manage their reputations. And reputation is a complex concept, but it's about the symbolic beliefs surrounding an organization, their capacities, their intentions, their history, and their mission, and it's embedded within multiple audiences. So some of the most significant audiences for universities are these formal ranking organizations, accrediting agencies, college rankings, the potential student population, which can be sorted out through SAT scores and exclusive admission policies, and then ultimately a job market, which tries to evaluate how good a BA is and what a BA from all these different institutions mean. Now, reputation is a little bit more of a sophisticated and contextual version of the signaling theory of the value of higher education, which says that higher education is not actually worth much in and of itself, but that merely having a diploma indicates that a graduate is a certain kind of person who is able to get into college and didn't fail out in the 4 or 5 years it took to complete them, and therefore deserves a good career. But it's important to think about reputation, because the sort of formal idea that education is a high-quality product that makes people better in some way is central to the both public and private worth of education for society and for prospective students and employers who seek college graduates. So, speaking about digital disruptions, the two example ones are e-commerce and journalism. Now, e-commerce is Amazon and similar companies, and it's useful because there are a large number of non-substitutable products, but products are highly substitutable within categories. And what this means is that if you want a certain book, say Donna Haraway's Simian Cyborgs and Women, or if you want to take a certain course like Ancient Greek Philosophy, then you want that item and no other. You won't be satisfied with Bruno Latour's Science in Action or with a course in microeconomics. But yet, within that category, the products are highly substitutable. You don't care if your copy of Haraway is hardcover, paperback, or ebook. And all those intro philosophy courses should be more or less identical. You know, sure, they will differ in details, but people trust that Introduction to Philosophy is the same across different colleges. And in journalism, you have this product, credible news, which requires craft skills and a long-term commitment to understanding what's going on in the world. You have a publishing model that's about a local distribution of an international service. Right? So news, particularly the AP Newswire, is objective as everywhere. It can be accessed just like scientific knowledge and historical knowledge, which is also supposed to be universal, but yet which is doled out at a retail level by professors. And finally, you have something which is a public good, which is being subsidized by an opaque business model. And for newspapers, this was advertising by local businesses. For higher education, the economics are often very opaque. So what happened with Amazon? Well, when Amazon started out, it targeted retail bookshops, which it could undercut by not having to pay expensive rent on storefronts. And then replaced the distributors who sold to bookstores by having a more efficient logistical system because they had better data and better design. Publishers were alarmed by this sort of concentration of power in Amazon, but had no choice but to deal with Amazon because otherwise they would lose access to the market of readers. Readers became locked into Amazon services through the Kindle DRM environment and then through Amazon Prime subscription services. So once you have a bunch of Kindle books, it's really hard to not own a Kindle because then those books become useless to you. And finally, Amazon went to authors and said, hey, we can replace everything that publishers do for you. You'll have to do your own editing and your own marketing, but we'll give you more money. And so the idea is Amazon replaces publishers, distributors, and bookstores to directly connect authors and readers. And while a lot of people have decried the end of the bookstore, I think that literary culture has survived so far intact over the past few decades. Journalism is a very different situation. Basically, by a historical accident in the 19th century and early 20th century, credible accounts of the news and other places which readers were interested in and which was provided by journalists on the scene were distributed in an artifact, the paper, which was in fact paid for by business advertising, the revenues of which went to the publishers. And now, with the advent of the internet, digital distribution just broke the artifact of the paper. Nobody actually needed to buy a newspaper anymore. Craigslist and Google undercut advertising revenues to the publishers, and then direct Twitter journalism and YouTube videos makes it so that we believe we can understand what's going on in Syria right now without having to, say, have a journalist there to give us a credible context. And in many respects, the newspaper business has just been destroyed by these disruptions. So, for MOOCs, the two disruptions, one replacing classes to cut costs, replacing faculty labor with digital capital by sort of scaling labor over many more students, and then doing the same thing for administrative costs by making universities bigger without having to increase facilities or the number of deans or anything like that. And the next step is looking at certifications and achievements for completing MOOC classes, the equivalent of diplomas in traditional higher ed. But there's not yet an external accreditation board to ensure quality in MOOCs or to make sure that they have a high reputation. So it is unclear if MOOCs will be able to duplicate Amazon's ability to just crush the bookstore supply chain. And there is also a very real possibility that it will do to education what the internet did to journalism, and sort of destroy the skilled laborers who made the socially beneficial parts of the service valuable. So what's the potential for MOOCs? Very simply, 18 million people attended an institution of higher education last year, but that could be billions of students if the institutions could meet the demands of a new global middle class, which, if you look at this world distribution of income chart, might not have the money to pay the traditional costs of attending college, but yet do have enough to own a computer and have access to the internet. There are about as many cell phones on the planet as people, and I've seen pictures of refugees escaping war zones carrying laptops. So bandwidth and technology is not a problem. Access and ensuring quality is. Now the challenges for MOOCs, well, one is the pedagogy. Many studies have revealed that there is something about FaceTime that is important, and many of the social benefits require that students leave their homes and leave their communities and discover themselves on their own. And then in practice, while MOOCs might talk about connectivist learning and being affinity groups and spaces for people to come together and teach themselves, in practice they're often merely hyper textbooks, video and text and self-assessment quizzes bodged together, and it's unclear if people actually learn anything from that. If there is no learning, then there won't be any chance to develop a public reputation. And in particular for reputation, there's a long-standing reputation ecosystem surrounding colleges, both sort of the informal attitudes and opinions and then the formal ones produced by accreditation boards and college ranking services and the like. And replacing that will be very difficult. Academic integrity remains an open question. It's unclear how to make sure that students are doing their own work or not trading answers online. Finally, while MOOCs have lower labor per student than traditional classrooms, they still require some labor, and managing and moderating online communities and conversations is very much a skill, and it's very much not one that we understand at this point. And so professors will have to adapt, and the new best practices will have to be identified. And finally, the business model is very unclear, and while MOOCs are considering charging about $100 per course, it's unclear if this is actually a long-term revenue stream that is sufficient to maintain educational quality and to pay the people who will be required to keep the servers up and running and to develop new content and to manage courses. So MOOCs do have a lot of potential. They look a lot like digital disruptions which have worked in the recent past, but there are still major open questions which prevent the hype brigade from being right about the sort of inexorable advance of MOOCs into the future. Thank you.